I am Shubira, and this is my book, The Angels of Kailash. This is the second book of the trilogy of the war between the demons and human beings. The first book of the trilogy is The Demons of Jaithria, and this is the second book. The third book of the trilogy is going to come out anytime next year. I shall now be reading a paragraph from The Angels of Kailash. Realization dawned on them at the same time. This was not the remains of a shipwreck. It was the Timingila itself. They looked at each other in shock and anticipation, their warrior instincts immediately coming to the fore. A fish this size would destroy a few coastal towns without even trying. They did not doubt Guruji's capacity to destroy it. They wanted to see how Guruji would do it. But first they had to cross it. After their shocking discovery, they began their journey again. And this time they did reach Guruji. The Timingila was so huge that it may not be aware of their presence. But it was definitely disturbed. Great sounds were coming out of its belly. It sounded like the word bloop, which is made when someone gulps or swallows noisily. It was probably the only sound it knew, as that is what it must have done throughout its life. They pushed back a little to have a proper view of the mighty creature, and were surprised to see that it was multicolored. Some parts of it were emitting fluorescent green, yellow and red lights. The fluorescent colors might be helping it to navigate the ocean. This was one paragraph of the protagonist of this book trying to destroy the largest fish in the world, which because of a tsunami was coming out and would have destroyed coastal towns and much more than that. I hope you enjoy reading this book as much as I enjoyed writing it. Thank you.
Good evening. Welcome back to Studio One. For this discussion, History Inspiring Mystery, we are very happy to have with us our guests, Miss Sujata Massey, Miss Mariah Fredericks, Miss Madhulika Liddle, and Miss Harshali Singh. Sujata Massey is an internationally best-selling author who writes crime fiction celebrating the historical accomplishments of women in India and Japan. She has won the Agatha, Mary Higgins Clark, Lefty and McVitie Awards for historical and contemporary crime fiction. She's also been a finalist for the Edgar and Anthony Mystery Prizes and Harper Lee Legal Fiction Award. Sujata received her bachelor's degree from the Johns Hopkins University's writing seminars and worked at the Baltimore Evening Sun newspaper before turning her hand to fiction. Mariah Fredericks, she was born and raised in New York City. She graduated from Vassar College with a degree in history. She is the author of the Jane Prescott mystery series set in 1910s New York, which has twice been nominated for the Mary Higgins Clark Award. Madhulika Liddle, she is a novelist and award-winning short story writer. She is best known as the author of the Muzaffar Jung series, though she also writes other novels and short stories in different genres and across themes ranging from black humor to social awareness, crime to romance. She was the first Indian to win the Commonwealth Broadcasting Association's short story competition in 2003 and the first Indian to be longlisted for the Sunday Times EFG Short Story Competition, the world's richest short story prize in 2016. Miss Harshali Singh will lead the discussion. Harshali Singh is a New Delhi-based author of the much-loved Haveli series, which has 2 books as of now. She's a member judge at the Consumer Forum. An academician with a decade of experience of working with pre-primary age group in different capacities ranging from operations head to the curriculum and academic head. She, as a teacher trainer, conducts workshops to enhance proficiency in advanced teaching methodologies. She is a trained occupational therapist from the Institute of the Physically Handicapped. We request Ms. Harshali Singh to begin this interesting discussion.
So a very good evening to everyone watching, and especially to my fellow panelists who are erudite and strong writers, as everybody's just heard, with voices and minds that demand an innate sense of balance. Their writing calls to an immersive reader who is mindful of the distance that we have traveled as a society and yet can see the journey with hope. So, without further ado, to my three powerful and lovely creators of wonder, tell us, why did you decide to write in the historical mystery genre? Can we start with Sujata?
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Harshali. I appreciate it. So I turned to historical mystery writing after just starting to write contemporary mysteries. And I did that for over 10 years. And I realized that most of the ideas I had for those mysteries, like the twists and the secret, it was something that happened in the past. And I found myself spending a lot of time looking into Japanese history for my first series because I just wanted to go that way. And so now I write a mystery series that's set in 1920 Bombay, and it features a young Indian woman lawyer. But the journey to doing that came when I was in India. My family is from Calcutta, and also a step parent's family is from there. And I had never known the story of Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose. And it turned out his house was just on the other side of the block where my grandparents lived. And I thought, this is an incredible story. The world doesn't know this story. And how could I tell a mystery story that sort of got into the world of Indian independence from this other direction? And so, that's how it took off. And from there, I just love that zone. And I think I'll be there for a while.
Oh, well, we hope so too, for sure. And looking forward to getting to know a little bit more about this. Madhulika, what about you?
My love for historical detective fiction, probably my first interaction with the genre was probably when I was about 13, because I was going through my mother's old books, stuff which she bought years ago.
Yeah.
And in there, I discovered a book called The Chinese Maze Murders. It's by Robert Van Gulik, and it's part of the Judge D mysteries. And it's amazing. And I was blown away by that book. I said, this is so fantastic, because he has a fantastic detective story, and not just one, but he has several mysteries. Plus, it's medieval China. So it was fantastic. And then a few years down the line, my sister got married, and her husband reads historical detective fiction, and that's it. He doesn't read very much else. He just reads that. And from him, I borrowed, I don't know how many dozens of books. And by the time I'd been through all of them, I said, there's historical detective fiction from everywhere. There's nothing in India. And so I set out to create. Yes.
So your books, the Muzaffar Jung series especially, would have a special place of honor in his bookcase for sure.
Yes, I mean, he helped inspire it in a way. So, well, that was it.
Yeah. Coming to you, Mariah, what prompted you to write in this genre?
Well, for many years, I actually wrote contemporary young adult fiction, sort of novels about teenagers, and your major threat and danger was the cafeteria food or your best friend or whatever. And historical mysteries, that was the genre that let me tell the story that I wanted to tell, because I was working on a book And two lines just popped into my head, which was, I will tell it, and I will tell it badly. And I immediately felt that this was not a contemporary voice. It certainly wasn't a teenager voice. And that it was somebody who had been keeping a secret for decades. And I thought, what would you keep a secret? Well, you keep a murder secret. And I've always loved history, and I've always loved particularly violent history. I was drawn to English history where, political processes, battle and chopping off heads and killing your nephews. And so I've always seen history through the lens of murder, I think. And one of my all-time favorite books is I, Claudius, where I have a speech impediment, or I grew up with one. And so the idea that a stammerer who is seen as a half-wit can survive the slaughter of his entire family by another part of his family to become emperor, I think really informed my vision of writing a story about a servant who, because no one notices her, can solve murders among the affluent and the influential.
Wow. I mean, I'm looking at all three of you and thinking the inspiration comes from different sources. And so it can come from anywhere, actually. That's so wonderful to know. Sujata, tell us a little bit more about the Bombay Prince. What was the motivation for this book? The
Yeah,
kind
so
of, the extent of research that was involved in writing it. Tell us a little bit more about that.
this is the Bombay Princess, the third book in the Praveen Mystery series, and I knew when I started it, I wanted it to be a story that you could enter the series at any time. So that was one thought. I wanted to have a book that had a theme that didn't really rely on things that had happened before. And when I was doing research on one of my earlier books, when I was in Mumbai, I was
Yeah.
talking with a historian friend who said, when the Prince of Wales came to visit Bombay in November
Bombay.
1921, there were these riots that lasted for several days, and they were riots with Parsis and Anglo-Indians on one side and Hindus and Muslims on the other side, to united, these groups that you wouldn't necessarily expect. And it was such a big event, but it sort of has been forgotten over time. Like, people don't dwell on it anymore and what it meant. And this violence went throughout India, or, I guess I should say unrest, because it wasn't a huge amount. But I thought about having a mystery story unfold against the backdrop of the rioting, because then you do not know if the obvious would be that the death of this young woman student outside her college is political because of the rioting. But it might be something else, and that's what my heroine Praveen Mystery tries to tease out. True.
So what was the extent of the research that you had to do while you were writing this?
Okay, so I had to do a lot of understanding the details of the prince's visit. And to my great delight, the British government had detailed what he did every single day of that tour, including where he had lunch, what he wore, who was there, who of the Indian community was there, what they said. So I used that as a framework. And I also looked at a lot of old newspaper articles, because the press from around the world came to cover that event. So I looked at that. And I'm also telling a story about a young woman who's in a college environment. She's one of the few female students at a
Yeah.
coeducational college, and to boot, it's a Scottish missionary college. So there's like a colonialist vibe there. So I went to that college, and I
Oh.
found a old literary magazine from the 1920s, and there was an article in there by an anonymous lady student, which described basically what it was like to feel harassed and to feel isolated. And, she didn't want her name used, but she wrote this very brave article in the student literary magazine. So I was able to use that, and I was also able to learn about the history of student uprisings against the government in Bombay.
Okay.
And in case anybody's wondering, it's Wilson College that I pick on, but I call it Woodburn College. But it really will, it sounds, anybody reading the book will recognize the structure of the college because I had gone all through the college and funny little things about that area.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So, my next question goes to all three of you. When you write about the past, how do you balance the need for, because our readers are very modern, so how do you balance that need of a reader and bring in details of the past from that? I mean, for your writing. So, Mariah, would you like to start on this one?
Um, this is something I try. I do work very hard at, and I'm sure that I get it wrong because it is a really difficult thing to balance out.
Yeah.
I ask two things of the reader: that they go along with me, that Jane, who is a young woman in service, speaks with a very high level of eloquence, and that her employers trust her implicitly with the private details of their lives and give her a certain amount of leeway. But because I do that, I try and play fair elsewhere. And the 1910s in America, and especially in New York, are a huge time of change. So people's views are evolving. But I always let Jane have her blind spots. I let the appealing characters have their blind spots. Um, in the second book, for example, it ends with a women's march for the vote, which happened in 1912 in New York City. And Jane starts off the book thinking, I don't know if I want the vote. That seems like a lot of work. I don't think I know enough to weigh in on national events. And I show her reading a newspaper and being confused by stories she is not familiar with. And by the end of the book, she has come to understand what the vote would mean to her, and more importantly, why people don't want her to have it. And she does join the march. But I always try and show progress as a journey. It's something that you work towards. You don't just start off with all the right positions and attitudes.
Right.
Because I think that's part of your world building.
Yeah. What about you, Madhulika?
Uh, you know, I think I should say that here that I have two different sets of books, other than the other books, but the
Yeah.
historicals. I
Yeah.
have the Muzaffar Jung series, which is a set of four books featuring a Mughal detective. They are
Yeah.
set in 1656, 1657. And the series which I'm doing now, in fact, the book I was saying has just been released. It's called The Garden of Heaven.
Do
This
you
was
have it? I love the cover actually.
Oh, I don't have the copy right now.
Okay.
Unforgivable. But anyway, so The Garden of Heaven is the first book of the Delhi Quartet, and it spans the entire quartet will span 800 years of Delhi's history. And while it's a historical, it's not detective fiction. It's
Yeah.
just pure and historical in other ways.
Yes.
And but one thing which I found when I was doing the Muzaffar Jung series was that if I tried to have Muzaffar be the typical 17th century North Indian male, he might have been impossible for us, even for me at this stage, to relate to. Because your average North Indian privileged male back then was very much like the average North Indian privileged male now.
Now.
You know, horribly patriarchal, horribly closed, isolated, insular, and opinionated, self-opinionated, mansplaining everywhere. And I didn't want Muzaffar to be that sort of man. So
Yeah.
actually, I made him the sort of woman I am. You know, he's he questions things. He has a very egalitarian and a very liberal sort of mindset,
Hmm.
and he does not. His best one of his best friends is a boatman, things like that.
Hmm.
So he has an attitude which is not typical of that period. And I did that because I thought modern readers would not be able to sort of appreciate
Yes.
something like that old, the typical attitudes of that period.
So he's
Also, yeah,
sorry.
sorry, go on.
Yeah,
Go on.
continue. I was just
No.
going to say, so he's the the ideal male that you probably thought of at that time. Huh?
Yes, much different from what probably the average male would
Yeah.
have been.
Yeah.
Also, I think I realized one thing both in the Muzaffar Jung series and when I was writing Garden of Heaven,
Hmm.
that actually I've come to the realization that human nature doesn't change. The emotions which perhaps we feel today when we sort of encounter, say, violence, or we encounter a threat or something of that sort, may have been very similar to what people 400 or 600 or 700 years ago felt like. I think that is why so many historical writers are able to write convincingly, because I don't think
Right.
human nature changes that much.
Right. That's true.
So,
Mariah, I'm going to come back to you because I was thinking and processing what you said you also wrote the young adult. Does that help you to bridge that gap? I mean, when you write historical fiction, and the question was that how do you bring in that point where you are able to relate to a modern reader? Has the writing in the young fiction arena helped you in this particular genre?
Well, I always thought of them as very different because contemporary young adult, I always told it in the present, everything's coming at you, you're reacting. You're not so aware of things that don't relate to you personally.
Yeah.
Um, but it's interesting, and with historical, I do use voice a lot. I go back, I read newspapers, I read Edith Wharton to get into that head. And America in 1910 is still kind of young. It's very excited about itself. It's very excited about its potential. So there is some of that energy, certainly, in both genres as I'm approaching them.
What about you, Sujata? How do you bring in that timelessness? I think you're on. I think
I'm
you're on
sorry.
mute.
Could,
Yeah.
could you just
No, that's it.
rephrase it for me?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. How is it? How do you bring in the timelessness in your books, in your writing?
Oh, okay. So the feeling of being there. Well, fortunately, there is so much left in Mumbai of old Bombay that I can walk through
Yeah.
and really enjoy and be able to share. Whether it's the tiled. I do a lot of work on interiors, for example, the kinds of tiles that were on floors. I love the kinds of windows. I take a lot of photographs when I am in Bombay and other places. I try to have, I go to the mountains and I stay in any type of historic hotel if I can. And so what I do is I can make a template of my
Right.
character's home based on the place that I've walked through.
Right.
So that's something that I'm doing, but there's always room for improvement. I was on a call with with a book group in Mumbai recently, and they said, "Oh, you just aren't doing enough with the Parsi sari specifically. You're doing all these regional saris, you're doing all this hand loom, but you're not doing enough with that." So it's like now I know I have to have a date with somebody, a Zoom date or a phone date to go over my saris for my next book.
Okay, that's another place where you can get inspiration from. A sari can actually lead to a interesting story for you. Uh,
Yeah,
so,
because they're political. It's like
yes,
whether what it's made out of means so many
yes,
different things. The way
absolutely.
it's draped means something.
Yeah,
When did women start uncovering their hair? If we're taking the palu off the head,
yeah.
those are all big things that I like to work with.
Big, yes, big milestones actually. Yes, very true. Mariah, tell us about the character of the lady's maid, Jane Prescott, that we were talking about. She's so layered and complex, and she's constantly
Oh,
delving
thank
into
you.
social issues. Sorry?
Thank you.
So tell us about how do the social issues of the past juxtapose with the social issues of the times we are living in now? How do you maintain that? Where is the point that you find wherein you decide, okay, this is what I'm going to, you know, peel, or I'm going to find more about?
hmm Well, when I first started thinking I was going to write historical, I had to think about when in history, and I wanted a time when women had some mobility and some agency. And I knew I wanted it set in New York, so because that's where I live. So that limited my era. And very quickly I came to 1910s New York, which is largely known through the novels of Edith Wharton or Henry James, Julian Fellowes' upcoming series. Um, and it's your Vanderbilts, it's your Astors, it's, your JP Morgan. So it's a time of enormous luxury and wealth, and it's also a very violent time, which makes it a fabulous era for mystery writers. Um, it's You have a lot of social division. You have huge wealth, very low taxes, so immense poverty. You have huge waves of immigration, all those shots of Ellis Island, which brings dynamism and creativity, but exploitable labor and nativist backlash. You have women and people of color pushing for space and voice in the public realm that they haven't been allowed before. So, of course, that, at this point, I think everybody sees the parallels to America today.
Actually,
So,
as you were listing them down, I was thinking, oh my God, this is all very, very relevant right now.
right. So I always start the books with Jane as a very old woman in the 1980s, which was another of our Gilded Age looking back. So it sort of sets some of the context. The books progress year by year, and I pick a signature event. I'm so sorry. Of each year, like the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire or the Titanic, that informs the murder in some way thematically.
Yes.
Because I always want it to resonate with the contemporary reader, although not, as my agent warns me, to hit people over the head with the message. So I try not to do that.
Yeah. No, but yes, as I said, that I think if we write in parallel genres also, I think somehow it kind of stream finds its way into each other. I think they're all interconnected in some way or the other. So when
Definitely.
I wrote the first book in the Haveli series, it's called A Window to Her Dreams. I began with the primary plot line and an idea. So in my mind, there were these three characters that I thought would get the most weightage. But as the story started developing, I realized that a secondary character had elbowed out all the others and had become the second lead all on her own. So I wanted to ask all of you, are you a plot driven writer, or do you let the characters take you on their journey? Do you like write very organically and just let it go, let the mystery form on its own, etc. And maybe then later on come back and then put in, wherever, the red herrings, etc. You wanted to do that. Madhulika, let's start with you this time.
I when I was doing my Muzaffar stories, I was plot driven. My characters in the first book, The first book, which was called The Englishman's Cameo,
Yeah.
that took me 7 years to write. And that was because my characters kept running away with me. So
Yeah.
it took me a while to sort of rein it in and figure out how I wanted to write. And after that,
So
I got a
how has
bit
that
better.
changed? I'm sorry, but how has that changed to the new book that you've written right now?
Now it is easier. When you're writing mystery, when you're writing a detective novel, at least for me, it's important to have my plot mostly sorted out
Okay.
before I start. Otherwise, I get really confused and it's a mess. So there, I'm very careful to be very plot driven.
Hmm.
Now, when I wrote this historical fiction, The Garden of Heaven, where it's historical but not detective, there I allowed my there is a plot, but I allowed my characters a little free rein. So I'm writing the second book in the series,
Okay.
and I'm having a lot of fun because my characters are doing things as they like, and I'm
Yes, you.
enjoying it. Yes,
Yeah. Everything else will be sorted out on the editing table, I think.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
What about you, Sujata? How do you write? Are you a plot driven or an organic writer?
Um, well, I have to have a little bit of a structure in order to get my editor to agree for me to write the book. But I think I am really character driven, and if I have a weakness, it's that I have too many characters because I think about the world, and for example, an Indian household,
Yes.
especially in those days. Not only is it an extended family household, but there's also all these different servants, and they're not wallpaper. I like Mariah's books, they're real people and they have interesting things going on. So the characters surprise me all the time. And it was a really interesting going into this college environment because I wanted to write about students, I wanted to write about staff, and I had to kind of limit myself. How can I
Mm,
have a full flesh character that you can appreciate and maybe suspect, but also give credence to, like, it's a bustling environment and there are all kinds of people around. So that is really a challenge to me, to do that. And I try to bring my characters down every book, but I usually wind up having some kind of a list of characters to explain explain who's there.
And tying out all their loose ends at the end, I think, would be another task in itself.
Yeah, that's for
right.
sure. And if the editors look for those things, if something's missed, the readers let you know.
Yeah.
And there are all kinds of strong feelings about endings and how much of an ending do you give after the denouement?
Yeah.
What is satisfying for me as a reader? How does the writer? How does the reader feel that everything is okay? Because usually
Hmm.
there could be a bittersweet twist, but usually you want people to feel there's some kind of a conclusion or closure.
Yes, that's true. What about you, Mariah? Do you, when you start writing, do you decide who's done what and then go backwards, or is it you begin and then you let them take over?
I usually know who did it at the end of the book, and I'm possibly more a plotter. We call it plotter versus pantser here. And I definitely have an outline. I mean, my books are very character driven. Jane is the draw, and the characters around her have a soap opera element that you follow them through the books and see how they grow. But I have a very firm rule with myself that in every single chapter, Jane has to discover something about the central story of who was killed and who are we going to hold accountable.
Okay.
Because otherwise I will just get caught up in, oh, we're going to the movies. Oh, this drama over here. So,
Yes. Yeah, so I think that is the change I saw in myself also when I started writing. The first book, as Madhulika was saying, it just went all over the place, and then I had to bring everything back. And then I realized that, you do need a sort of template or foundation or plot line or blueprint or something wherein you can, then place your story on, because otherwise it's you're just having a gala time and nothing is getting done. Yeah. Uh, so, Madhulika, I have to tell you this. I am truly, truly envious of the premise of The Garden of Heaven. That's your new book. And while Muzaffar Jung, as we were just talking about, is historical detective mystery, Garden of Heaven is an out and out historical fiction. So, tell us how different and or how similar was the experience of writing the two genres. You were talking about it, but I'd like you to expand a little bit if you can.
Uh, okay, I'd like to start by talking about the Garden of Heaven, what it is. It's the first book of the Delhi Quartet, and this
Yeah.
one is set from 1188 CE till 1398 CE. 1188 was shortly before Muhammad Ghori attacked Delhi and ended the reign of the Rajputs in Delhi. So, as a result of that, the Delhi Sultanate began, and basically Delhi changed from being ruled by Hindus to being ruled by Muslims. And a lot of the most fascinating architecture, for instance, that we see in Delhi these days, for instance, the Qutub Minar complex, and a lot of the areas around that date from this period. It was a very fascinating period because it saw the rise of Sufi thought. And there are all sorts of interesting legends surrounding Delhi around this time. There's a lot of folklore. And of course, this was the period when Delhi's only woman ruler, Razia Sultan, sat on the
Yeah.
throne. So it was a
Yeah.
fascinating period, and that's what I wanted to talk about. My story is about common people living their lives against a background of all this interesting history with it. So that's what the Garden of Heaven is about. And for me, a lot of the things were similar to how I went about writing the Muzaffar Jung stories. There was a lot of research involved, a lot of wandering around, a lot of exploring places, and just getting a feel of the place. Of course, I knew a lot of these places before because I've been there like millions of times, but
Yeah.
also doing a lot of research through books, etc. Different period from Muzaffar Jung because Muzaffar Jung is 17th century and this is much earlier.
Yeah.
So I had to do a good bit of research. But I think the main difference was in, first of all, in Muzaffar Jung, the Muzaffar Jung stories, there are very few real historical characters. Maybe there's somebody who plays a minor role, but that's
Okay.
it. It's just the backdrop which is historical.
Huh.
In the Garden of Heaven, there are actually historical characters who play an important part. So Razia Sultan is a very important character in the book. And there is Amir Khusro. Amir Khusro was the poet and the musician and also a very important courtier. And he plays a part in the book as well. So that is one important difference, that there are more historical characters actually as part of the story.
Hmm.
And of course, the fact is that since I didn't have to plot a detective novel, it's it was a little easier for me. I actually
Okay.
find it much easier because plotting a good detective novel is, I think, it's very difficult. So people who do it well and who do it consistently, book after book, have my respect. Really, I did it for 4 books and I can't do anymore.
No, the third book in my Haveli series is a mystery, and hence, I understand now the kind of work that goes behind writing one, and so the respect is very much shared. you know,
Yes.
Oh
so
my God. I just have to say, I think it's harder to write a novel without a mystery, having done it. I don't know about you, Mariah, but I think it's harder because you have to think about how are we going to keep people engaged? How are you going to
engaged.
have pacing?
Yes.
How are you going to
Yeah.
have suspense? So I think my hat is off to the two of you.
Yes. Agree.
Yeah.
Mutual admiration society here. So we're very happy to be talking to each other. But now let's come from writing to something which is, which is part and parcel of being an author, being a published author, and that is marketing. And all of you, I'm sure, are either struggling or enjoying the marketing, bit of marketing your books or marketing yourself. So tell us, how has marketing changed since you wrote your first book, especially post COVID? We can start with Sujata.
Yeah, I'm an old timer. So my first book came out in 1997. And in
Wow.
those days it was this big tour across the country if you could get the tour. And it was all about showing up at bookstores and having bookstores order your book, and there was very very little on social media. I'm trying to even remember if we had Facebook. I guess we probably had Facebook then. So obviously the bookstore tour went away. When the Bombay Prince came out, it was during this tiny halcyon moment when almost everybody had gotten vaccinated. The people who were going to get vaccinated had gotten vaccinated, and there was no Delta. So I did do two outdoor events at bookstores that I could drive to. But after that, everything's been indoors. On the positive note, because we can do things on the screen, so
Hmm.
many more people can be brought into these conversations with authors, people who could not drive to a bookstore, people who might have been intimidated to go into a store. They've never done that. The global reach, I'll stop there because I'm sure that both Madhulika and Mariah have things to say too.
Mariah, what about you? How involved are you in the
Well, when
marketing
I
process?
first started, I mean, not as much as I'd like, maybe. I mean, I don't get to make the big decisions about how the book gets marketed. Um, when I was in YA, it was all about making librarians happy, school librarians, and it was a lot of face to face. With mystery, by the time I started 4 years ago, a lot of it had moved online
Yeah.
because it's less expensive for the publisher and you can ask the writer to do it. It is the bookstore events, it is the library talks, which we can't do right now.
Yeah.
Um, I worry about Zoom fatigue a little bit. And you're 8 times, Lee Child once said, you're 8 times more likely to buy a book you can pick up in a store.
Yeah.
I will say though that I think that the mystery community is enormously supportive of one another, and that makes the online experience much more rewarding.
Yeah, that's true. But Madhulika, do you also worry about the exhaustion that people are now finding with, with the Zoom calls, etc.? Why?
I
Because
don't.
your book is being marketed as we're talking, and
Yeah.
it's so new, and I'm sure you are dealing with, you're thinking of new ways of doing it in this time that you cannot really have physical get-togethers and launches, etc., and even go on a book tour actually. So how are
You know
you
what?
dealing with it?
I think one problem here is that I am really bad at marketing my books. Really, really bad at it. I was never very good at telling my publisher anyway, that let's have book events and let's do this, let's do that. So, in fact, for me, what has happened is over the past couple of years, I've become much, much more social media savvy. So, I've started to make a definite push to being a little more pushy. So I don't know whether that is going to make a difference or not. But talking about Zoom exhaustion, I don't know whether that's happening in India because,
Hmm.
in fact, my sister, who's a writer, also she's a historian and she writes nonfiction.
Yeah.
She was in an actual offline event the other day, and when she talked about it, that it's upcoming, and she put out an invitation. Lots of people approached her and asked, "But you've not given us the link to it." And she said, "No, there's no
Ah.
link to it. It's not an online event."
Yeah.
So I think also what has happened is that while some people might not, you know, like to come to a bookstore, now there might also be people who are, as Sujata also said, that they don't want to drive there. They are happier sitting at home. Or of course, they are, like in India, there are a lot of people who are, sort of they are in their offices or they're on the commute or something, and
Mm.
they find it much easier to just attend online. So I think at least in India, that is, it's become a trend which is probably going to go on for a while at least.
Hmm.
I don't know how
That's
it
true.
will convert. I don't know how what the conversion will be. Whether that will actually make people buy more books, I don't know. But let's see.
Right.
It's making me think about the writer as a personality. Like we're doing so much on Zoom,
Yeah.
like it depends on like, oh, how's your highlighter? How good are you at jokes? And people might never read your books. However, they might hear something you say that's interesting. They may get comfort. They may think this is about, I would like to try to write a book. And I see these four women talking about it. And I think maybe I could do it. Look, so we play a different role because of what's happened with Zoom.
That's actually very true. That actually that's a very positive way to look at it. Very true. Thank you for that. So we have one question right now, and it is from Anupama Jain. She's again got a new book coming out, and she's a good friend. Does history repeat itself in mysterious ways? Mariah, would you like to take this one?
Oh, I don't even think they're so mysterious. I think, yes. I mean, I think that certain waves, I mean, certainly I see in terms of the beginning of the 20th century America and now inequality. When I was growing up, that was not such a factor. Now we have vast gulfs between classes. I think women in America felt we had achieved a certain level. Now we're going back a little bit. Voting rights are under threat here as well. And you always think you have very good reasons for making the mistakes of the past. You think this time it's different. We're not xenophobic the way we used to be. Well, it's a different thing. So I think a lot of humility is required, and that's what history, I would hope, teaches us, is humility about our own responses, and to look for bad patterns that we know lead us in bad directions.
Right.
The technology changes. I don't think the feelings do, going back to what Madhulika was saying.
Yeah, that is true. So I hope, Anupama, you've got the answer to your question. Would you like to add anything, Sujata, Madhulika, to that?
I will. Yeah, I was just, earlier this past winter, I was working on this book, The Bombay Prince, and writing about these throngs in the street rioting. And that afternoon, I came home from doing something, and I found that throngs were rioting in Washington, D.C.,
Yeah.
35 minutes from my house. The people were being attacked on the street. The buildings were being taken over, and I could what I appreciated about it was I actually had a feeling of what it was like to have that fear of your city no longer a safe place that you knew, and that things had changed. Your fellow citizens were so different, and I had tried to write about it, but then it came to me. And then with
Yeah.
the book I'm writing right now, I've been writing about it's a mystery and involves reproductive rights. It involves, the great difficulty of women in getting birth control or abortion or even a safe place to deliver a baby in 1920s India. And all of a sudden, we're seeing the right to abortion disappear across the United States. So
So
I don't know why it is that I I think about these issues maybe a little before they become a big thing, and then it all of a sudden it's happening. It's happening again.
Sujata, I'm sorry, but what are you thinking of next? We all need to prepare.
Oh, yes, for our next mystery is about I hear what you're saying. Oh, what's coming out? Oh, you know what? It's going to.
I'm
I
going to
don't
give
know
you
if
a call.
I should say. I don't know
I'm
if I
going to.
should say. I'm ready for something lighthearted.
Oh, that'll be great. We
Oh.
really, really need it now. So on that note, I think I'm afraid that's all the time we have. I've enjoyed this in-depth masterclass, and I'm sure whoever's watching and whoever's keen to write in this genre is also had a great time listening to all of you. Um, and a heartfelt thank you to Pune International Literature Festival for giving us this platform to share our views and voices. And I wish all of you a very bright and Merry Christmas and a wonderful, safe, healthy, and a blessed New Year. Have a great, great celebration. Thank you so much for talking to me. I had a lovely time.
Thank you so much.
It certainly was an informating and refreshing session. Thank you, Miss Sujata Massey, Miss Mariah Fredericks, Miss Madhulika Liddle, and Miss Harshali Singh for being PILF guests. Don't miss our next and the last conversation for the day. Yours truly, Meera Nair. It will begin in a short while. Join us for the same at 9:15 p.m. See you there.